The second choice. I never thought I'd feel satisfaction watching my family fall apart. But when they showed up at my door with desperation in their eyes, I realized I'd been preparing for this moment my entire life. My hands trembled as I gripped the doorframe, staring at them huddled on my porch. Mom's mascara-streaked face. Dad's slumped shoulders. The absence of my sister Vanessa, the golden child, the perfect daughter, spoke volumes. They needed me now. After 32 years of being the family's afterthought, suddenly I was their only hope. Funny how life works out sometimes. "Rachel, please, can we come in?" My mother's voice cracked, a sound I'd rarely heard growing up. "It's about Vanessa." Of course it was about Vanessa. It was always about Vanessa. Stepped aside, wordlessly inviting them into the modest Chicago apartment I'd worked my ass off to afford without a penny of their help. The same apartment they'd criticized as quaint and practical, their polite way of saying it wasn't good enough. Not Vanessa level enough. They sat awkwardly on my IKEA couch, looking like strangers in my living room. My father cleared his throat. "I suppose you've seen the news." I hadn't. I'd been purposefully avoiding my phone since my supervisor texted to ask if I was related to that Vanessa Coleman. But their faces told me everything I needed to know. "What happened?" I asked, remaining standing. Something about towering over them for once felt appropriate. Mom broke into fresh sobs. Dad placed his hand on her knee, a tender gesture I'd rarely seen him offer her, much less me. "Your sister, she's been arrested." Each word seemed physically painful for him to say. "Securities fraud. She's been running a Ponzi scheme through her investment firm. They're saying she stole nearly $40 million. I should have been shocked. I should have gasped or cried or demanded to know how this could happen. But something cold and hard had formed in my chest years ago, and now it just seemed to expand, filling me with an icy clarity. "And you're here because?" I let the question hang in the air between us and why father winced. "Rachel, she's your sister." "Half-sister," I corrected automatically. The distinction had always mattered to me, even if they pretended it didn't. The mom looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "She needs a good lawyer. The kind that costs, well, more than we have. We've already mortgaged the house, but you want my money." It wasn't a question. The realization landed with a dull thud in my stomach. "It would just be a loan," Dad rushed to clarify. "Once this misunderstanding is cleared up." "Misunderstanding?" I laughed, the sound sharp and foreign even to my own ears. $40 million isn't a misunderstanding, Dad. She made some mistakes, Mom pleaded. But she's still family. Family. The word hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. I walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the gray Chicago skyline. Beyond the glass, rain began to fall, fat droplets racing down the pane. It seemed fitting somehow. "Let me tell you about family," I said softly, not turning around, and I began to remember. I was 7 when my father married Catherine, bringing her 4-year-old daughter Vanessa into our lives. The wedding photos show me in a frilly pink dress, gap-toothed smile forced for the camera. What they don't show is how, just moments before, my new stepmother had bent down to whisper, "Try not to fidget during the ceremony, Rachel. You're not a little animal." From the beginning, it was clear that our blended family had a hierarchy, and I was at the bottom of it. Dad had always been distant, more comfortable in his role as provider than parent, but after Catherine and Vanessa arrived, even those rare moments of connection seemed to evaporate. Vanessa was everything I wasn't. Where I was awkward and bookish, she was graceful and charming. I inherited my biological mother's wild curls and wide hips. Vanessa got Catherine's sleek blonde hair and willowy frame. Teachers who had me in class first would raise their eyebrows when meeting my younger sister. "Hard to believe you two are related," they'd say, not bothering to hide their preference. When I brought home straight A's, my report card would be briefly acknowledged before being tucked away. When Vanessa brought home B's and C's, there'd be celebrations for her improvement and hard work. I learned early that achievement wasn't valuable unless it came with struggle, and somehow, everything I did was dismissed as having come too easily to me. Rachel just doesn't apply herself to anything but books, Catherine would say to my father, as if my passion for reading was a character flaw rather than a strength. Meanwhile, Vanessa's every interest became a family investment: dance lessons, tennis camps, beauty pageants. I still remember standing in the audience at her recitals, holding bouquets of flowers that were bigger than my head, meant for her. BY High School, the patterns were firmly established. Vanessa was the social butterfly with the boyfriend on the football team. I was the quiet one who ate lunch in the library and worked part-time at the local bookstore. Home was just a place I slept. I'd learned to make myself scarce, to take up as little space as possible. The worst part was that Vanessa wasn't even mean to me. In fact, she was unfailingly nice in that distant, pleasant way people are toward casual acquaintances. She'd compliment my outfit or ask about a book I was reading, but there was always this underlying current of pity. Like she felt sorry for me for not being her. My senior year, I got accepted to Northwestern with a substantial academic scholarship. It wasn't a full ride, but it was impressive, the kind of achievement parents usually brag about. I'd placed the acceptance letter on the dining room table before dinner, hoping for at least one evening where the conversation might center around my accomplishments. Dad picked it up, scanned it briefly, and said, "This is great, Rach. But have you looked at state schools? The scholarship is nice, but we need to be practical about the remaining costs." Catherine nodded along. "College is expensive, and with Vanessa only 2 years behind you." She trailed off, but the implication was clear. My education was an expense, Vanessa's would be an investment. That night, I locked myself in my bedroom and applied for every additional scholarship and grant I could find. I increased my hours at the bookstore and picked up a second job waiting tables on weekends. When September came, I moved into my dorm room with 2 suitcases and a determination to never ask them for a dime. 2 years later, Vanessa enrolled at Yale, my father's alma mater. They helped her move into a spacious off-campus apartment, complete with new furniture and a monthly allowance that probably exceeded what I made working 3 jobs while maintaining my GPA. Saw the photos on Facebook. Catherine arranging curtains in Vanessa's bedroom, Dad assembling a desk, the 3 of them, arms around each other, smiling in front of Vanessa's new home. I remembered my own move-in day, Dad dropping me off with a quick hug and an awkward pat on the shoulder before heading back home, claiming he needed to beat the traffic. That Christmas, they flew to Aspen for a ski vacation, Vanessa's big request, Mom explained in her annual holiday card. I wasn't invited. I worked double shifts at the restaurant and used the tips to buy myself a used laptop. By the time I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in finance, I'd already secured a job at a mid-sized accounting firm in Chicago. They came to my graduation, all 3 of them, and took me to dinner afterward. Dad ordered champagne and made a toast to Rachel. "We always knew you'd find your way." As if my success had happened despite them, not because of me. 2 years later, when Vanessa graduated from Yale with a business degree, they threw her a massive party at the country club. I watched from the periphery as she was paraded around to meet Dad's colleagues and friends, her future being mapped out through introductions and handshakes. One of those connections led to her first job at a prestigious investment firm, where she quickly rose through the ranks. In my mid-20s, I dated a guy named Marcus who worked in my building. He was kind and funny, with a passion for jazz and a collection of vintage records. The first time I brought him home for Thanksgiving, Catherine cornered me in the kitchen. "He seems nice, Rachel," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But don't you think he's a bit limited? I mean, IT support isn't exactly a career with much growth potential." I broke up with Marcus 3 months later. Not because of what Catherine said, I told myself, but because we wanted different things. Looking back now, I wonder if what I really wanted was someone my family would finally approve of, someone who could give me the validation they never did. When Vanessa got engaged to Bradley, a third-generation investment banker with family connections to 3 senators, the wedding planning consumed our family for over a year. Every conversation, every holiday, every phone call revolved around floral arrangements and seating charts and honeymoon destinations. "We're thinking a destination wedding in Santorini," Vanessa announced over Christmas dinner. "Daddy, we'll need to figure out how to transport at least 100 guests." My father didn't even blink at the implication of cost. "Whatever you want, princess. It's your special day." I thought about the credit card debt I was still paying off from my degree, how I'd been denied a small loan from him when my car broke down the previous winter at AITA. Vanessa's wedding, I was a bridesmaid, not the maid of honor, of course. That went to her Yale roommate. I stood in a seafoam green dress that cost more than my monthly rent, watching my family beam with pride as Bradley slipped a diamond the size of a grape onto my sister's finger. During the reception, I overheard Catherine talking to one of her friends. "2 daughters, and at least one of them is on the right track," she laughed, champagne sloshing in her glass. "Rachel's always been, well, she marches to her own drummer. But Vanessa, she's really made something of herself." I slipped away from the wedding early. No one noticed I was gone. Over the years, the pattern continued. Vanessa's life was a carefully curated series of achievements and milestones, each one celebrated more lavishly than the last. Her first director-level promotion. Her waterfront condo purchase. The birth of her son, my nephew Ethan, who I was permitted to see primarily through Instagram posts and the annual Christmas card. Meanwhile, I built my own life brick by quiet brick. I switched firms, climbing the corporate ladder methodically if unspectacularly. I made friends who became more like family than my actual relatives. I dated, sometimes seriously, but never found someone who felt worth bringing into the complicated tangle of my family dynamics. Every few months, I'd get a call from my dad. "Just checking in," he'd say, before launching into updates about Vanessa's latest triumph. I'd listen, offer appropriate congratulations, and rarely volunteer much about my own life. What was the point? The few times I mentioned a promotion or accomplishment, he'd say something like, "That's nice, honey," before steering the conversation back to familiar territory. The year I turned 30, I finally saved enough for a down payment on my apartment. It was modest but mine, a 1-bedroom with a balcony overlooking a small park. The first night I spent there, surrounded by unpacked boxes and takeout containers, I felt a profound sense of peace. I'd built this life without them. Despite them. That same year, Vanessa launched her own investment fund, specializing in what she called innovative market strategies for high-net-worth individuals. Dad couldn't stop talking about it. "Your sister's really disrupting the industry," he'd say, using buzzwords he clearly didn't understand but had memorized from her promotional materials. Catherine sent me newspaper clippings about Vanessa's firm, with little notes in the margins. "Thought you'd be interested in what your sister is doing." As if I needed the reminder of how different our paths had been. When the invitations arrived for Vanessa's 40th birthday gala, a black tie affair at the Ritz-Carlton, I almost threw mine away. But some masochistic part of me wanted to see them, to remind myself of the reality I'd spent years trying to escape. The party was exactly as I'd imagined, opulent, excessive, a monument to Vanessa's success and our parents' pride in it. I wore my best dress, a simple black number that had served me well through various work functions, and stood by the bar, nursing a gin and tonic as I watched my family in their natural habitat. Dad gave a speech so glowing it bordered on parody. "From the moment Vanessa came into my life, I knew she was destined for greatness," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She has exceeded every expectation, built an empire, created a beautiful family. She truly is the American dream personified." I wondered, not for the first time, what it would feel like to hear him speak about me with even a fraction of that pride. Later, as the evening wound down, Vanessa found me by the dessert table. She was slightly tipsy, her perfect makeup beginning to smudge at the corners. "Rachel. You came," she exclaimed, as if my presence was an unexpected delight rather than an obligation. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, forcing a smile. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between pity and genuine curiosity. "You know, sometimes I envy you," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. I nearly choked on my drink. "Excuse me?" "Your freedom. Your simplicity." She waved her hand vaguely. "No expectations, no pressure." Just living your life on your own terms. Before I could respond, before I could unpack the backhanded nature of her compliment, she was whisked away by Bradley for another photo opportunity. I left shortly after, the taste of bile in my throat. IT was the last major family event I attended voluntarily. For the next 2 years, I made excuses for holidays and celebrations. Work commitments. Travel plans. A mysterious flu that seemed to coincide with every family gathering. They didn't push too hard for my attendance. My absence created less inconvenience than my presence, and then, 3 weeks ago, everything changed. Was at work when the news broke. A colleague stopped by my cubicle, phone in hand. "Hey, Coleman, any relation?" she asked, showing me the headline, "Rising Star Investment Manager Vanessa Coleman Arrested in Massive Fraud Scheme." The room seemed to tilt on its axis. I mumbled something about needing air and fled to the bathroom, where I locked myself in a stall and read every article I could find about my sister's downfall. The details were damning. For years, Vanessa had been falsifying returns, creating elaborate shell companies, and using new investor funds to pay off existing clients. The classic Ponzi scheme, executed with precision until, like all such schemes, it couldn't sustain itself anymore. A client got suspicious, hired a forensic accountant, and the house of cards began to collapse. The articles painted a picture of extravagant personal spending, multiple homes, private jets, offshore accounts. All while presenting herself as a financial genius, a market whisperer who could beat the odds. Thought about all those family dinners where she'd held court, explaining complex financial strategies that, in retrospect, sounded too good to be true. I remembered how my father and Catherine had hung on her every word, nodding along as if they understood, beaming with pride at her expertise. All a lie. All of it. I didn't call them. I waited for them to call me, to explain, to include me in this family crisis the way they never had in family celebrations. The call never came. Until today, when they showed up at my door, not to explain or apologize or seek comfort, but to ask for money. "Let me get this straight," I said, turning back to face them in my living room. "Vanessa stole $40 million, and you're here asking me for money to help her?" "It's complicated, Rachel," Dad said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I knew all too well. "The legal fees alone will be enormous, and with her assets frozen, what about your assets?" I interrupted. "The house in Lake Forest? Your retirement accounts? Catherine's jewelry collection?" I gestured toward my stepmother's hand, where a substantial diamond still glittered. They exchanged uncomfortable glances. "We've leveraged what we can," Dad admitted. "But Vanessa's legal team is suggesting we'll need at least $300,000 for the initial defense. And with your financial background, you thought I'd have that kind of money just sitting around?" I laughed bitterly. "Or did you think I'd take out loans, the way I did for college? The way I have for every major expense in my adult life, because my sister was always the priority?" "That's not fair, Rachel," Catherine sniffed. "We've always treated you girls equally." The audacity of the statement hit me like a physical blow. Memories flashed through my mind, standing outside Vanessa's closed bedroom door, listening to them plan her sweet 16 party while I heated up a frozen dinner for myself, watching Dad help Vanessa buy her first car while I took the bus to work, sitting alone in my apartment at Christmas while they vacationed in Europe. "Equally?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "Mom." "Catherine," I corrected myself, watching her flinch at the deliberate use of her name. "You have never in your life treated us equally." "Rachel," my father warned, "this isn't the time for old grievances. Your sister is facing serious charges. She could go to prison. And that would be what? My fault? My problem?" I felt something shift inside me, a lifetime of swallowed words rising to the surface. Where was this family emergency protocol when I needed help? When I was working 3 jobs to put myself through school? When I had pneumonia my junior year and couldn't afford both antibiotics and rent? Dad looked genuinely confused. "You never said you needed money for medication." I shouldn't have had to say it. The words burst out of me. I was your daughter. You should have known. You should have cared enough to ask. A heavy silence fell over the room. Outside, the rain had intensified, drumming against the windows with rising urgency. We've made mistakes, Dad finally said, his voice small. We know that. But right now, Vanessa has always needed, I cut him off. And you've always provided. But not this time. Not with my money. Catherine stood up abruptly. I knew this was a waste of time. You've always been jealous of your sister. I stared at her, incredulous. Jealous? Of what, exactly? Her fake success? Her criminal charges? Or just the unconditional love you've given her that you never once showed me? That's enough, Dad said sharply. We're all upset, but this isn't helping. No, I agreed, suddenly calm. It isn't. Nothing would help, because you still don't see it. Even now, with everything she's done, you're still putting her first. You're still making excuses for her while holding me to an impossible standard. I walked to my front door and opened it. I think you should leave. They stared at me as if I'd slapped them. Rachel, please, Dad began, but I shook my head. I have nothing for you. Not money, not sympathy, not forgiveness. Not today. Slowly, reluctantly, they gathered their things. Catherine brushed past me without a word, but my father paused at the threshold. She's still your sister, he said quietly. I met his gaze steadily. And I'm still your daughter. Or had you forgotten? He flinched as if I'd struck him. For a moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of understanding in his eyes, a flash of regret. But then it was gone, replaced by the familiar disappointment I'd seen all my life. The door closed behind them with a soft click that felt oddly final. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, replaying the confrontation over and over in my mind. Part of me felt liberated, 32 years of unspoken resentment finally given voice. Another part felt hollow, empty, as if I'd lost something I never really had to begin with. Around 3 a.m, I found myself scrolling through old family photos on my laptop. Birthday parties where I stood at the edge of the frame. Holiday gatherings where Vanessa occupied the center of every shot. Graduations, vacations, celebrations, a pictorial timeline of my peripheral existence in my own family. And then I found it, a photo I'd almost forgotten. Me at about 5 years old, sitting on my father's shoulders at the zoo. Before Catherine. Before Vanessa. My small hands tangled in his hair, both of us laughing at something out of frame. I was wearing purple overalls and light-up sneakers. He was looking up at me with such plain, uncomplicated love that it made my chest ache. What had happened to that father? When had I stopped being enough? The questions haunted me as dawn broke over the city, painting my apartment in shades of gold and amber. I made coffee, watched the early morning commuters from my window, and tried to imagine what would happen now. Would they find another way to fund Vanessa's defense? Would she take a plea deal? Would she actually serve time? I wasn't naive enough to believe that the justice system treated wealthy white-collar criminals particularly harshly. With the right lawyers, Vanessa might get away with minimal consequences. The thought made me angry all over again, not just at her, but at a world that seemed designed to reward people like her regardless of their actions. My phone rang at exactly 9 a.m. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to swipe right. Rachel Coleman? A male voice, unfamiliar. Yes? This is Special Agent Marcus Daniels with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I'm calling regarding your sister, Vanessa Coleman. My heart lurched. What about her? We'd like to speak with you about some transactions between your accounting firm and Ms. Coleman's investment fund over the past several years. Would you be available to come to our office today? The room seemed to tilt again. Transactions? I don't handle anything related to my sister's business. Our records indicate otherwise, the agent said coolly. Several audits from your firm were used to validate investment returns that we now know were fabricated. Your signature appears on multiple documents. My signature? That wasn't possible. I hadn't spoken to Vanessa about anything work-related in years, let alone signed off on her company's financials. Unless, I'll be there, I said, writing down the address he provided. But I think there's been a mistake. After he hung up, I sat motionless, trying to process what was happening. Then, with shaking hands, I opened my laptop and navigated to the state's business license database. I searched for Vanessa's company, VC Investment Strategies, and pulled up the corporate filing there. Listed as Chief Financial Officer was my name. Rachel A. Coleman. The room spun. I gripped the edge of my desk, fighting waves of nausea. She had used my name. My credentials. My professional reputation. All without my knowledge or consent, and our parents wanted me to help pay for her defense. I called in sick to work, then spent the next hour gathering every financial document I could find. Bank statements, tax returns, employment records, anything that could prove I had no actual connection to Vanessa's firm beyond the fraudulent use of my identity. By the time I arrived at the federal building downtown, I felt less panicked but no less betrayed. The special agent, a serious man with prematurely gray hair and tired eyes, listened as I explained that I had never worked for my sister, never signed any documents for her company, had no idea she was using my name and credentials. "That's a serious allegation, Ms. Coleman," he said after I finished. "You're suggesting your sister committed identity theft in addition to securities fraud." "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "That's exactly what I'm suggesting." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We'll need to verify your claims, of course. Bank records, employment history, handwriting samples to compare against the signatures we have on file." "Whatever you need," I agreed. "I have nothing to hide." As I left the interview, I felt oddly calm. In the elevator, I checked my phone to find 6 missed calls from my father and a text that simply read, "Call me. Urgent." I didn't. Instead, I called an attorney, not one of my father's golf buddies or Vanessa's country club connections, but a former college classmate who specialized in white-collar criminal defense. Sarah listened without interruption as I explained the situation, then let out a low whistle. "Rachel, this is serious," she said. "If what you're saying is true, if Vanessa used your professional credentials without your knowledge, then you're a victim here, not an accomplice. But we need to be proactive about establishing that." I hired her on the spot. For the next week, I worked with Sarah and the FBI to untangle the web Vanessa had woven. We discovered that she had created a paper trail suggesting I had been consulting for her company for years, complete with forged signatures on tax forms, audit reports, and regulatory filings. She had even set up an email address in my name, through which I had apparently conducted business with her clients and partners. The depth of the deception was breathtaking. It wasn't just opportunistic, it was calculated, deliberate, sustained. She hadn't just used me as a convenient fall guy, she'd constructed an elaborate alternate reality in which I was complicit in her crimes. When the FBI presented me with copies of the forged documents, I felt physically ill. There was my signature, or a reasonable facsimile, on papers I'd never seen before. There was my professional license number, my educational credentials, even a biography that mixed real details of my life with fictional accomplishments. Why would she do this? I asked Sarah during one of our strategy sessions. Why drag me into her schemes? She had to know it would all come out eventually. Sarah's expression was grim. "From what I've seen of cases like this, people who commit fraud at this level often have a narcissistic streak. They don't believe they'll get caught. And if they do, they want someone else to blame. Someone else to blame." Of course. I was the perfect scapegoat, same last name, similar professional background, but with none of the connections or resources Vanessa had cultivated. If things went south, as they inevitably would, I could take the fall while she protected herself, the final betrayal in a lifetime of betrayals, and why parents called daily. I let their messages pile up, unheard. I couldn't face them yet, couldn't trust myself not to say things that couldn't be unsaid. Sarah advised me to avoid contact with them anyway, at least until my status as a victim rather than an accomplice was firmly established with investigators. 10 days after the FBI first contacted me, Sarah called with news. "They've confirmed your signatures were forged," she said, audible relief in her voice. "And they've found evidence that Vanessa accessed your personal records through a contact at your college alumni office. You're in the clear, Rachel." I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt hollow. What happens now? They'll add identity theft and forgery to her charges. It actually strengthens their case against her considerably. Sarah paused. "There's something else. The prosecutors want to know if you'd be willing to testify." Testify? Against my own sister. In a courtroom where my parents would undoubtedly be sitting, watching, judging. "I need to think about it," I said. That night, someone knocked on my apartment door. I peered through the peephole to see my father standing alone in the hallway, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "5 minutes," I said by way of greeting. "That's all you get?" He nodded and stepped inside, his movements stiff and uncertain. He refused my half-hearted offer of a drink and remained standing, as if he didn't expect to stay long enough to get comfortable. "Vanessa told us what she did," he said without preamble. "Using your name. Your credentials. Creating a paper trail to implicate you if things went bad." I said nothing, waiting. "She said?" He swallowed hard. "She said it was insurance. That you were the perfect backup plan if she ever needed someone to take the blame." The words hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. "And you believe her? That she'd do that to me?" I finally asked. "I didn't want to," he admitted. "But the FBI showed us the documents. The fake email accounts. There's no denying it." I crossed my arms, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the apartment. "So why are you here?" He met my eyes directly for what felt like the first time in years. "To apologize. For everything. For not seeing what was happening. For not..." His voice broke. "For not being the father you deserved." Something inside me cracked open, not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of it. A tiny fissure in the wall I'd built around my heart. "It's a little late, don't you think?" "Yes," he agreed simply. "Too late, probably. But I had to try." He looked around my apartment with new eyes, taking in the bookshelves filled with volumes, the framed diploma on the wall, the photos of friends I'd made into family. "You built a good life, Rachel. Without our help. Maybe despite us." I said nothing, but the hollow feeling in my chest began to fill with something warm and unfamiliar. Not joy, exactly, but perhaps its distant cousin, vindication. "The prosecutors want me to testify against her," I said. He nodded, unsurprised. "Will you?" "I haven't decided." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, holding it awkwardly for a moment before placing it on my coffee table. "Catherine doesn't know I'm here. She's having a hard time accepting what Vanessa did. Especially to you." I glanced at the envelope, making no move to pick it up. "What's that?" "Plane tickets. To Mexico." He gave a humorless laugh. "We were supposed to go next month. Family vacation. Vanessa's idea, originally, before all this happened. She can't go now, obviously. And Catherine and I, well, it doesn't seem right. But the tickets are non-refundable, and I thought maybe you could use them. Take a friend. Get away for a while." The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of family trips I wasn't invited to join, here was an invitation to take their place, to go where they would have gone, to occupy the space meant for them. It felt both like an apology and a placeholder, a gesture that acknowledged the past without quite making up for it. "I'll think about it," I said, neither accepting nor refusing. He nodded, seeming to understand that this was all he could expect for now. There's one more thing you should know. Vanessa, she's agreed to a plea deal. Part of it involves making a full confession about how she operated the scheme, including how she used your identity without your knowledge or consent. I raised an eyebrow. That's surprisingly decent of her. It reduces her sentence, Dad said with a grimace. But yes, I think there might be some genuine remorse there too. She asked me to tell you she's sorry. For what it's worth. Not much, I thought, but didn't say. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. I know we can't undo the past, Rachel. But I hope maybe we can have some kind of future. If you'll let us try. I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I asked the question that had been burning inside me for as long as I could remember. Why was it always her? What made her so special that I became invisible? He looked surprised, then deeply sad. Oh, Rachel. You were never invisible. You were so capable, so self-sufficient. You never seemed to need us the way she did. He shook his head slowly. That's not an excuse. It's just. I think we took your strength for granted. We poured everything into Vanessa because she demanded it, while you just kept quietly succeeding on your own. We failed you by treating your independence as a reason to leave you alone, rather than a quality to celebrate and nurture. It wasn't the answer I expected, but there was a ring of truth to it that resonated somewhere deep inside me. I had been capable. I had been independent. I had succeeded despite them, not because of them. There was power in that realization, a power no one could take away from me. Goodbye, Dad, I said softly. After he left, I picked up the envelope containing the plane tickets. 2 first-class round trips to Cancun, departing in 3 weeks. I thought about who I might invite, perhaps my friend Alyssa from work, or my neighbor David, who'd been dropping hints about wanting to travel together. Then another idea occurred to me. The next morning, I called Sarah. I've decided about testifying, I told her. I'll do it. But I have a condition. 6 months later, I stood outside the federal courthouse, squinting in the bright June sunshine. The sentencing hearing had been brief and unsurprising. 5 years in a minimum security prison, restitution payments that would take Vanessa a lifetime to fulfill, and the permanent revocation of her financial licenses. The golden child had fallen, spectacularly and completely. My testimony had been the final nail in her coffin, clear, detailed, and devastating. I'd recounted discovering my forged signature, the fabricated email accounts, the elaborate paper trail she'd created to implicate me if her scheme collapsed. The jury had been riveted, the prosecutors grateful, the judge visibly disturbed by the calculated nature of her betrayal. Throughout it all, I never once looked at Vanessa directly. I couldn't bear to see if there was genuine remorse on her face or just the practiced contrition she'd perfected over years of getting away with whatever she wanted. Why parents sat in the front row during my testimony, my father's face a mask of grief, Catherine's eyes red-rimmed and hollow. They didn't try to approach me afterward. They seemed to understand, finally, that some boundaries needed to be respected. Now, as I descended the courthouse steps, I felt lighter somehow. Not happy, there was no joy to be found in this family tragedy, but unburdened. The truth had been spoken, acknowledged, recorded. No one could deny it anymore. Rachel. I turned to see my father standing a few feet away, alone. Where's Catherine? I asked, glancing around. She couldn't. He cleared his throat. This was too much for her. She's at home. I nodded, unsurprised. And how are you holding up? He gave a sad smile. As well as can be expected, I suppose. The house goes on the market next week. Between the legal fees and the restitution payments we've committed to helping with, there's not much left. For the first time, I felt a flicker of sympathy for him. He'd lost everything, his golden child, his home, his retirement security. The life he'd built, however flawed, had crumbled to dust. What will you do? I asked. We've found a small condo in Evanston. Nothing fancy, but it's close to the lake. He hesitated. And closer to you. If that matters. It did matter, though I wasn't ready to admit how much. Did you ever use those plane tickets? He asked suddenly. The ones to Mexico? I had to smile at that. I did, actually. But not quite how you expected. The week after Vanessa's plea deal was finalized, I'd called the resort in Cancun and explained the situation. They'd been surprisingly accommodating, allowing me to change the reservation and apply the credit differently. Instead of a luxury suite for 4 people, I'd booked a modest room for 2.2 days after Christmas. While my family dealt with the fallout of Vanessa's crimes, I'd flown to Mexico with Ethan, my 8-year-old nephew. Vanessa's son. The child caught in the middle of this disaster, confused and frightened by his mother's absence and the whispered conversations that stopped when he entered rooms. Bradley, overwhelmed by single parenthood and legal consultations, had accepted my offer with pathetic gratitude. He needs something normal, he'd said, handing me Ethan's small suitcase. Something good. For 7 days, I'd built sandcastles with this solemn little boy who had my eyes and Vanessa's smile. I'd taught him to snorkel in the crystal-clear waters, watched his face light up when a sea turtle swam past us. We'd eaten too much ice cream, stayed up late watching movies, collected shells along the shoreline at dawn. On our last night, as I tucked him into bed, he'd asked the question I'd been dreading. Aunt Rachel, is my mom a bad person? I sat on the edge of his bed, choosing my words carefully. Your mom made some very bad choices, Ethan. She hurt people, including herself. But that doesn't make her all bad. And it definitely doesn't make you bad. He'd nodded, processing this in that serious way children have when they're trying to understand adult complexities. Will you still be my aunt? Even when mom's in jail? Of course I will, I'd assured him, my throat tight. Always. As I told my father this story, standing in the shadow of the courthouse where his favored daughter had just been sentenced, I watched a range of emotions cross his face: surprise, sadness, and finally, a glimmer of something like hope. You're a good aunt, he said quietly. Better than we deserved. It's not about deserving, I replied. It's about choosing. Every day, we make choices about who we want to be and how we treat the people in our lives. I met his gaze steadily. I'm choosing to be there for Ethan. Because he needs me. And because it's the right thing to do. My father nodded slowly. And us? Have you made a choice about us? I thought about the weekly dinners we'd started having, just the 2 of us, at a neutral restaurant halfway between our homes. Tentative conversations, careful questions, the slow rebuilding of something that might one day resemble trust. I thought about Catherine, who still couldn't quite look me in the eye but who had sent a birthday card last month with a handwritten note that said simply, "We were wrong. I'm sorry." Baby steps. Imperfect progress. I'm working on it, I told him honestly. That's all I can promise right now. He accepted this with a nod. That's more than I had 6 months ago. As we parted ways, him to his diminished life with Catherine, me to my office where a promotion awaited, I realized something profound had shifted inside me. The anger that had defined me for so long had transformed into something else, not forgiveness, exactly, but perspective. I would never have the family I'd dreamed of as a child. The wounds were too deep, the patterns too ingrained. But perhaps I could have something different, something healthier and more honest. A relationship based not on obligation or guilt but on mutual respect and clear boundaries, and in the meantime, I had built my own life, my own success, my own community of people who valued me for exactly who I was. Plus a little boy who needed an aunt who could show him that even when the world falls apart, there are still sandcastles to build and sea turtles to discover. Sometimes being the second choice means you have to work harder, stand taller, dig deeper. And sometimes, it means you develop the strength and wisdom the first choice never had to find. I am Rachel Coleman. Sister. Aunt. Survivor. The second choice who chose herself first, at last, and that brings us to the end of the second choice. I hope Rachel's journey resonated with you today. We all know what it's like to feel overlooked, undervalued, or pushed aside, though hopefully not to the extreme Rachel experienced. Have you ever been the second choice in your life? Or perhaps recognized that you unintentionally made someone else feel that way? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If Rachel's story of finding strength in adversity spoke to you, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more compelling audio stories that explore the complex dynamics of family, identity, and personal growth. Until next time, remember that your worth isn't determined by where others place you in their hierarchy. It's defined by the choices you make and the life you build for yourself.